Welcome everyone to our meeting organized by the Polish Rationalist Association on the humanist perspective on the threats to freedom in the modern world. My guests today are Monika Belițoiu from the Romanian Secular Humanist Association, ASUR, and Arve Ofstad from Humanistyczny Verbund, Norwegian Humanist Association. Welcome. So we are going to discuss the threats to freedom in the modern world in the humanist perspective. And the truth is that there are a lot of threats to freedom, starting from countries like North Korea, where you have basically no freedom whatsoever, countries like People's Republic of China, where apparently you have some freedoms, like some free commerce, etc. But the truth is that you can never speak your mind. So from a personal, individual perspective, you are extremely limited in your freedoms. There are countries where people cannot openly say what they believe because they would face a death penalty, like the countries where Sharia law applies if you say you're an atheist, or if you express the fact that you're gay, you would face the same. There are countries where you still cannot choose whom to marry. And there are, of course, a lot of countries where the freedom of speech is limited in many different ways. And we could think that even in many European countries, where of course we are very lucky to live compared to all those other countries that I've just mentioned, we still face a lot of threats to freedom. Obviously the freedom of speech of all kinds, because you don't need to have a totalitarian regime to affect the freedom of speech of the citizens. It's enough if there is a very strong social pressure that would result in people censoring themselves. And actually that's what's happening with the social media right now, that they are depriving us from private space. And there are more and more instances where people publish something in the social media considering that this is private, but it is actually treated as public and they are being penalized for what they say there. Sometimes they lose their jobs or there are other repercussions. There are also restrictions to freedom that we partly agreed upon ourselves, for example, during the pandemic times, and that was more voluntary than the other types of restrictions, but it was still a big restriction to freedom. And then, of course, there is also this very basic understanding of freedom, which is now endangered in Ukraine, where people are fighting for their freedom. So we could say that this is a really broad subject that could be debated for days. Well, I would like to ask our friends who have come here to Wrocław from Norway and Romania to share their perspective on what would be the most important for them or for their organization, what they have been involved with in relation to freedom-related projects. So I leave now the floor to you. I don't know who'd like to start.
No, I don't want to start, but you seem to point at me. I'm very happy to be here, but you've given us a very challenging question, because as you intend that you say yourself, that freedom is many things, or threats to freedom are many things. But my first thought was since you ask about how it is from a humanist point of view, I had to try to review, so what do the humanists think about freedom? And well, the easy answer is, of course, we are in favor of freedom, but there are aspects of it that is important that you can discuss. But the most important thing is that as humanists, I think one of the basic things, we don't have beliefs, but we have values and we have ethics and we have morals. So to say that we strongly believe in the freedom of the individuals, we still believe in the human rights of the individuals, and those two things are closely connected. We do believe in freedom of speech. We do believe in the freedom of information. I use the word believe, even though it's not believing, but we do favor, and we are for freedom of organization. We have freedom of human freedom in a general sense. But there are two additional aspects to it. One is that, yes, we believe in the freedom, but we also do believe in the respect of others. And we do believe in the equal opportunities and equal rights of everybody. And finally, we do believe that we are free, but we are in a collective. We are seeing ourselves a necessity to limit our freedom sometimes. You mentioned the pandemic. There are many other things that sort of do believe that we don't believe in individual freedom for everybody to do anything, because we do believe in that has to sort of be tempered with the respect for others and the respect of the rights of others. So that those aspects, I think, are fairly easy to understand and easy to sort of just strongly underline the importance of that for me, for us as humanists, and for me as a humanist. You did mention that there are these are sort of the political freedoms and the civic freedoms and the individual freedoms that we're talking about, but they're also important to sort of to see that people have to be free from poverty, because poverty often means that you're not free. At least you're extremely limited in how you can use that freedom. And in actually some countries and some areas, it's also the criminal activities is limiting your freedom quite a lot. But as a starting point, that's the easy one. Then you're asking us, how do we relate to that, partly in our own countries. Now, coming from Norway, most people think that it's such a free country and it's such a balanced country and it's got sort of so much human rights, there is nothing to fight for. But and if you're looking at it from a global point of view, that may be true. At least our problems are much smaller than what they are in the countries that you mentioned and than many other parts of the world. But if I have to say something about that, it is actually the case that the Humanist Association of Norway has for a long time been very concerned about to ensure that there is a real freedom of religion and beliefs and world views and that has to be a reality, because we've had a state church which is in a way, that the state has a special church, a special religion, which declares its own. That's something which we today, we think about these Muslim states and we think of some of the other theocratic states. Of course, we were not a theocratic state, but to have a state church was against, the freedom of religion. It was dominating the state, it was dominating the schools, it was dominating social and cultural life. So to limit that and to fight for a secular state which would give all religions equal opportunities and equal states has been an issue for the humanists in Norway. Now, it moved forward in several ways, and interestingly, I think it's been even more easy to fight for that as we have had a larger number of immigrants coming to Norway from other religions, and then on these issues we work together with them, and we have common interest, and I think increasingly they are and realizing, the state is realizing that it has to sort of provide these opportunities also for other religions, and then also for us as humanists and non-believers. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but it's because we have finally achieved that there is no longer an officially state church, but we still have the Church of Norway in a privileged situation, privileged position. So there is still something to be done in order to make sure that that is also been, I would say, that their power and influence is reduced so that they become at an equal level. We have, throughout the years, also been more actively involved in ensuring that other minorities have equal rights and opportunities. And you mentioned the LGBT movement. That the Humanist in Norway has been fairly strong in favor of that, in the forefront of that fight, because for a long time the church was denying these rights and denying the equal opportunities. Now they've also come to sense, and it's not longer such an issue with the church anymore. But the Humanists were the first to marry a gay couple. It was the first one to sort of accept them, and they still have to sort of continue that fight because the social stigmas are still there and there are still issues around it.
But I understand that you actually have some LGBT bishops in the Church of Norway now?
Yes, we do. I mean, there is even the first woman who was ordained as a priest. She died recently, and it turned out not when she was ordained, but later on she was actually moving in with another woman, and she was declared herself as a lesbian. So that was, and she is now. No, she was actually, sorry, she was the first bishop of Norway, female bishop of Norway, Turner. She died recently, and she is strongly remembered as such. So it's true. There. I don't know how to go into but I think some of the issues that you mentioned are also relevant in Norway. And I'm thinking exactly about how internet and social media was created in order to enhance the freedom of people, so that everybody can publish anything in order not to be stopped by some difficult editors or some other issues, and how that has sort of turned almost into the opposite. Not quite, but there are elements of that which is very sort of worrisome, and how that is being used to spread conspiracies and to spread fake news and to actually through the social media also limiting the opportunity for some people to be active. To some extent, the issues of political correctness and woke is also an important way of fighting for freedom and rights of some people, and still it's being used as a way to limit some of the other people's opportunities and freedom. So there are these issues, and I think also the issues of surveillance, which you are seeing to the maximum extent developed in countries like China. I mean, lots of people who increasingly feel the fear. It doesn't happen now, but there is a fear that as there is access to practically every phone, as there is access to every part of life, that there is that could be misused if it so happened. But I'm not going to go into much more into the Norwegian situation, because I think, they're small in comparison to the big issues. I think in relation to the big issues, you mentioned the world and the global threats. And, I have the same list of countries and issues as you have. definitely we as humanists are equally concerned about these limitations which happen so many places in the world. I see, if we want to talk about from a humanist point of view, it's actually maybe necessary to differentiate a bit from where you have sort of limits on freedom, threats on freedom, which almost affect everybody, like the surveillance in China, like in authoritarian regime where there is no freedom of press or information or speech. In a way, it affects everybody as long as if you're against the government, sitting government, whether it's an authoritarian president or whatever. And then there are unfortunately, these many cases where this is these people in power use and misuse religion in order to defend their activities and their actions. Not necessarily theocratic parties, but that happens in many, many countries where the ruling party government is using its connection with certain religious movements or churches to undermine the rights and opportunities for others. Yes, it happens in strongly theocratic states, some Islamic states, but not every Muslim state is equally bad at it. There are huge differences here. When Putin is using his church to defend his war in Ukraine, that's also a strong misuse and use of religion. When the Indian government is so strongly linked to the Hindu movement that they actually use that in order to try to reduce the influence and the opportunities and the rights of the Muslims, even when the Myanmar Buddhists do the same thing about their Muslims in their country and throw them out. These are issues that, in a way, what shall I say, make it even more important for us as humanists to react. And it shows, of course, how religion is being used, can be used, and is being misused and misused. Despite the fact, I think we as humanists, we accept that people are religious, but we don't accept the use and the misuse of political power of religion to limit the rights and the opportunities for others. So I think these are perhaps areas where it's even more important that humanists will have to will have to raise the issues and use their voices and to underline the importance of separating the religion from the states and in fighting for the secular states. I think that'll leave it at that to begin with.
Thank you very much. Monika?
It was really, really interesting. Thank you, Kaja, for inviting me. It's lovely to be in Poland again, and I like this space a lot. I think it's conducive to discussions, and I think probably most of us here realize that we are lucky to be able to speak freely about what we want and without fear for our lives, for our security, and so on. So. Even the fact that we can discuss the threats to freedom in the modern world, it's a sign that we live in countries that allow us to do that, and it's a good sign. From my perspective and my experience back home, one of these threats is the escalating extremism. We talk about religious extremism, we talk about extremism against LGBT people, against Roma people, and so on. And it starts, actually I've seen recently this Danish movie done this year. It's called in English Speak No Evil, about the microaggressions. One family that it's a victim to microaggressions from another family, and this aggression tends to go higher and higher. And the question is, how much do you take? You tend to be you want to be nice, you want to respect the others, because you talked about respect earlier. You want to respect their beliefs and their way of life, but for how long? How long do you take it? And how much do you expect? Do you want to have a response at some point, or do you do you respond with kindness all the way? So this is something to ponder about, because the way you act, or your lack of action is how the changes are being made in one way or another, because we want it or not, the world is changing constantly, and it's not always for the better. So yeah, this is why it's important to discuss these threats to freedom, but also to see if the response that the people that consider themselves the good people, if their response is appropriate, or it's even necessary. And another things that I would like to develop further is the lack of interest in democracy, policy, and public participation. The apathy of some people, even in my country, and I think in a lot of countries, the apathy that the people feel towards politics, public policies, and so on, I think it's a real threat to freedom around the world. Because we feel so comfortable, like we get to sit here in the chair and talk about stuff and feel relaxed and feel, oh, we have the freedom to do that and that, and we do not pay attention to all the laws that are changing slowly but surely, and all the bad changes that are happening amongst us. And I'm a bit concerned for my country, because before the pandemic we were in the streets and we were protesting the government that wanted to change some laws, and this happened in 2018. In the meantime, some of the politicians that were in the street with us then have joined forces with the enemy, with the party that wanted to change the law, and they changed it together. And the people feel betrayed by them. They feel like there's no opposition party in the country, and more people do not want to go to vote, do not want to have any kind of part in do not want to participate in anything related to politics and public participation. So everyone who has an interest to pass a law doesn't have so much opposition from the civil society as it was supposed to have. The freedom of press sometimes seems like a joke, because a lot of televisions are private televisions, and one independent investigation recently revealed that the parties were buying entire shows, TV shows, without saying that this is paid by this political party. So, and most of the parties do that. So the apathy is something understandable, but it's strange to me because the people of my generation were raised to question authority and injustice, because we grew up during a dictatorship, the communist dictatorship in Romania. So over the years, the parents and the grandparents instilled these ideas in us, and we gave it forward but somewhere along the line, people started to lose interest. And that's why us as humanists are trying to change that, and to go by that saying that this is how the world changes, good people raising their children right. So we try to have many projects aimed at young people who are interested in the future of their generation and what they can do to make that future good for them. And here is where we start debating about what it means to have a good future, because it means something different for everybody else. And there are people willing to give up a little bit of freedom for more security. And you come to a point where you have to ask, where do you cross the line between security and freedom? And we look at our neighbors with their problems. In Hungary, we look at our neighbors with their problems. In Ukraine, of course, with the war. We look at Turkey, which is not that far from Romania, with all the civil unrest that they had there and all the protests. We look at Iran with all the women rights that are they try to defend it now. So we see some of the problems that are like small fires that are starting to being lit all over the world. And sometimes you feel hopeful when you see this. Sometimes you feel disarmed. So I think it's good to have a conversation about it. It's good to have a discussion. Probably someone who will watch the recording or something will probably get some ideas and get some hope from it, and maybe to start to change something and to help us with what we want to do, what do we do in our countries.
Thank you very much. I was actually thinking about what you, Arve, said about the internet, that it was originally established to actually give people more freedom. And that's very true. I mean, in the Polish context, that's very, very true, because the first atheists in Poland after the 1999, those that didn't consider themselves communists anymore, but the new atheists, we actually gathered through internet, and that's how our movement started, and that's how our association was founded, based on the internet community. So I suppose without it, we might not even be here now. But it's true that these, like with any tool, of course, you can use it for good things and for bad things. But it's a very sad thing how it has turned into a mechanism of oppression in a way, a mechanism of propaganda for sure. Well, there is also what you mentioned, this political correctness, that is also becoming a very new type of threat to freedom, something that was not even that well known a few years ago, but actually now we can see that partly through internet, people become more radical in the way they debate, and this leads to the political correctness also being used as an oppression element a bit. Of course, it was not its original intent. It was not created for this reason, same as internet. But sometimes now it actually raises to be a big problem. So I wonder if you have any cases like this in Norway, since you mentioned it.
I do mention it because it is being debated. I think the majority, and myself also, would think that, in the big picture, the opportunities that internet has created and the social media has created are huge and important, and they still is important for very many people, as you can see in some of the more oppressed states where you still manage to communicate much better than you ever did before. So it is a very positive tool for very many, and I think even for those who don't use it for political purposes but just wanted to make friends and make contacts and everything else, it's been a fantastic opportunity, and it's created many happy hours, I think, for very many people. So I think that's still the big picture. I mean, but what we see is that the hate speech, the reactions to people who want to sort of stick their neck out and perhaps saying something which is not always popular. And you can see what we call the trolls on the internet. I don't know if that's a term which is being used otherwise, because we think that trolls are Norwegian. But the young female politicians who try to to just have a voice are being called all kinds of bad names, and they're getting comments directly and indirectly to such an extent that they sort of pull out of politics. You can see that in some of the voices from our minorities. The same way. I mean, they're using their strong voices and they say something and they're overwhelmed by criticism, hatred, and even threats. Go back to where I come from. I wish you never dead. I wish that Breivik, who killed 68 people in Norway, had succeeded even more. You know, those kinds of things that you're getting. And I don't think you got it in the same way when the only way to express yourself was actually to your friends or when you met in the shop, or through the edited media. You couldn't say such things in the media. So, I mean, there are people who are pulling out of politics, and I think that's a limitation of their freedoms. That in some cases it's you have to be very brave, and there are, I don't have no numbers on this, but enough. There's not only one or two, but there are tens or 20s or more. People that we need to be part of politics, people who we need their voices in the discussion, in the public discussions, etc., who give up and who dare not. So that's my answer to that one. It happens. The woke issue is, well, it's more prominent. I mean, we're getting things from the States, right? It isn't quite as bad and it isn't quite as visible, but in some circles it is very difficult also to be against being very correct, politically correct. And I think it limits the opportunities for debates even within those people who are generally in agreement. And it does mean that I think I see a tendency, when you have both of these issues, you have the trolls and their supporters on one side, and you have the really strong woke people on the other side. It, even in our society, leads to more stronger divisions. You're adding up with we believe that we've had a tradition of people with different opinions who can talk to each other, who could have a civilized dialogue, and many of our political solutions are supposed to be created by people who are making compromises. And to some extent, when you have this sort of development of the extreme views, the willingness to compromise is being lessened. Again, I think most of those discussions about this, you point out the States where this has gone to the extreme. It's nowhere there in Norway, but you can see the tendencies, and I don't like it. I think it's against the idea of freedom and with respect and the rights, equal rights of others. That's my point.
Thank you. Monica, would you like to address this question as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm in agreement, with most of the things you said. Also, I have here the Amsterdam Declaration, because since we talk about the humanist response, it's like the source material for the things that we do, because like it says here, humanism should be a source of meaning and purpose. And when it comes to the fact that some people feel the need to censor themselves in order to, to not being criticized by others, or they feel like they cannot say what they want to say and they need to reformulate something. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, depending on the thematic and depending on the fact that, for example, if you want to try to say something that might feel offensive to other, isn't it possible to say that same thing without offending anyone? So I think, like Arve said, if people feel like they have to retreat from politics because of the way they were being treated, I'm not sure this is a good thing, because even politicians that we do not agree with them, they represent someone. They are a voice for someone. So from what I gather, it's not. It has to be discussed on a case-by-case situation. You cannot say that it's completely good or completely bad. This is my stance on the issues.
So let me ask you a more difficult question now. Actually, since the invasion on Ukraine started, we've been thinking a lot about a humanist perspective on, not on this conflict, of course, but on how a humanist should behave if you are a Ukrainian citizen. Because in general, as humanists, we tend to respect life, and we wouldn't normally be in favor of killing people, obviously. But it is quite a particular situation when you're actually being invaded, being attacked. So would it be okay for a humanist to actually fight back in this case? Also, the Ukrainian government issued this law that's been also quite controversial, that the young male citizens couldn't leave the country. So I wonder what you think about this.
So in regards to the second part, I do not think it's fair to not allow people to leave the country. I think there are a lot of conscious objectors to the war, and it is their right to feel so. So this is, since we live in Romania, we saw a lot of refugees, and there are a lot of people that came before the order was given to not allow the young men to leave the country. But most of the people that came were women and children. So even before the order was given, there were a lot of men decided to stay back and to fight the invaders of their country. And I go back to what I said earlier about the microaggression. The war is not like no one saw it coming. The aggressions of Russia towards Ukraine were in the past years over and over, and bigger and bigger. So probably we didn't expect to go on a full war like this, on a full-scale war or invasion, but it's not like they were good neighbors before. So even if, it is a difficult question, like you said, because yes, as humanists we strive to be ethical, but it's hard to know what you will do in that situation if you should kill someone.
But the question is whether avoiding fighting is actually ethical in such a situation.
I don't think it is. I think if it's about your life and the life of your loved ones, you could not avoid it, and it's perfectly acceptable to fight back in order to save the life of the ones you love. Since you are not the aggressor and someone else is doing an aggression towards you, I think it's in your right to riposte. What do you think, Arve?
It's I see your question. The humanist movement as such is not a pacifist movement, actually. At least there are amongst the humanists there are both views. There are pacifists there are conscientious objectors there, but there are others who see the necessity, if you want to put it that way, to be part of a military action and to defend yourself. I think, there's almost a general agreement even amongst everybody that it's ethical to protect yourself if you're personally directly threatened. But you should, and that is of course in international law. A country is allowed to defend itself against aggression. It is against international law to be aggressive, to invade other countries, as has happened just now. But to defend to do that. And even it is within international law that you can ask for help from anybody else, whether it's weapons or whether it's even troops or personnel. I mean, that's within international law. Now, we're not talking about international law, we're talking about humanist ethics, which is, I think, the most I have not seen any declaration in such thing, but I would think that most who feel themselves are humanists will feel that way, that in this case it's quite obvious that the country has been invaded, it has been attacked, so it's acceptable. And if it's acceptable for the country, it means it has to be acceptable for those individuals who do the fighting. I mean, and I've seen many interviews with Ukrainians who said, I never thought I would kill. I never thought I would be in the army. But still, given the situation, I find it's necessary and I find it's the right thing to do, unfortunately. So there are, of course, I think we also globally accept that there are people who are absolute pacifists, who are conscientious objectives in a very absolute sense. We would accept that those people happen, but then and that's also an ethical position to take, but then you have to be absolute in a way. The other question, which sounds a bit, which is more about equality of males and women, actually, when it comes to the issue of who should be who do you force to stay? Forcing people to stay doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fight in the army. Though most people will actually allowed to be so, but you can also make sure that important functions do continue to function. There is extremely important infrastructure issues and generally maintaining the society to work as it is. But if I suppose if you want to sort of take this equality issue, you should say that yes, it's correct for young children and elderly to leave the country because they need protection and you can't protect them in any other way, and maybe some of the adults will have to sort of go along with that and help out, but whether that's the male or the female should be more open, perhaps. That would be an sort of an equal opportunity. And we know that women are soldiers and fighters in very many countries and part of the army. And officially in Norway also, it's an equal duty for everybody, whether you're a man or a woman, to do your military duty. So that discussion can be, because it's in a way old-fashioned to say, only the women can take care of the children, because males can do so too.
Right, but there is also a question even whether it is okay to force anyone to stay. Well,
I don't know the answer to that.
So let me ask you another question. Do you think that humanists can actually make a difference when it comes to any of these threats? Do you feel that the humanist movement has been successful in any way in securing any of these freedoms? I'm not talking about the Ukraine situation right now, as we don't know actually any humanist organization from there, but focusing more on the rest of Europe. Maybe Monika could answer first.
I'm not sure about the humanist movement, but there are a lot of people that are humanist in their way of living and the way they conduct themselves. And I think many humanists have done changes for the good, for the better in the world over the years. Also, I think that the principles that the humanists have are strong ones, and I think their intentions are good enough for them to have a determination and a willingness to change the world for the better. But in order to implement big changes, it's not enough to be a humanist. You have to be willing and able to cooperate with others and to accept all the differences of your partners for the greater good. I think that's the only way you can achieve a bigger change for the better. It sounds a bit corny or cheesy, but over the history, this is how it happens. But I wanted just to go a little bit back about what Arve said about the difference between men and women and who raises the children and who has to stay and fight and so on. We just have to look back at history and the fact that the women didn't have the right to vote or to work or so on until the war came. And they were needed in the workforce, and they were needed to do something else. Then stay home and raise the children and look good for your husband. So the war was catalyzer for all these things, and the women's rights receive a big push after everyone saw that they are capable of fighting, they are capable of working, they are capable of having a word to say in how the society is being conducted. Yeah.
What I'm trying to think is, first answer was the humanist movement is not strong enough to make the big difference, unfortunately, yet. So therefore what Monica says, but I do think that in many, many places there are active humanists or in the fight for against oppressive religious regimes. The closest one I can think of is, of course, a big country, India. Those who defend even the rights of the equal rights of the Muslims would be the humanists there, but in alliance with lots of others, they may be characterized as Hindus, but I don't think they're very strong religious people. And that is my point here, that even in countries where it doesn't look like there is a big humanist movement as such, a large number of people are actually, what shall I say, following the ideas and the ethics and the morals of humanists as such, because they are and they don't do that in the name of any necessarily of a religion of some god or something. I'm trying to sort of scratch my mind here and try to think of where has that typically been happening, but my closest one is to think about Nelson Mandela. I never heard him speak very much about using the religion as a basis for his thought, and I consider him as a huge humanist. Even back to India, Gandhi was a devout Hindu, but his companion Nehru is definitely a secular person. And he did his utmost to ensure that India, after separation, would not be a Hindu nation, but would be a secular nation. And it worked well until recently. So we have enough of sort of strong personalities who act in a humanist way and who have been fighting together with other sort of well-meaning people in order to ensure that that the limitations of freedom are limited, are fought. So I think that is being found if you look through the history. I'm sort of slow at remembering here, but I think you can find practically every country there will be people who would not see themselves in any way as very, very religious people, but would fight for equal opportunities and equal rights, and the secular states would be some of the cases. Yeah.
I just wanted to add here that sometimes even spreading some ideas is helping move the world in the right direction. And I just have the example of Kurt Vonnegut, who was a writer, but also did the public speeches in a lot of places around the United States, talking about humanism and the values and what it means to the world to be a humanist and to have this point of view. So sometimes even these actions that seem small have an influence of the people that listen to you and the people that have maybe come up with a greater idea to do some good.
I absolutely agree with both of you. So I am very sure that there have been in history many such figures who didn't maybe know the word humanism, but they definitely were humanists and they made a big difference. But also if we look at the humanist movement, well, people behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, many of them were clearly humanists. And that was a very big achievement. And also whatever happened afterwards, the whole work to ensure that these rights are respected. We still have not succeeded to make sure that they are respected everywhere. But I think it is getting better and better, even though, well, there are these other forces that are trying to make it worse and worse. But we make it visible. We discuss it. We raise it all the time. Raise the awareness in so many different countries. So
yeah, because even if the society is in much better shape than it was a few centuries ago or a few decades ago, there are less people going to bed hungry. There are less wars. There are less wars that there were. So this is for the better. But we do not want this to be the golden age of humanity. We want the future to be brighter not darker than it is today. So that's why it's important to continue to try to do and to succeed in doing good.
Well, that's for sure. So we need to keep working, especially that as we have seen the new threats arise. Like when you think that you have finally won certain battle, it turns out that there is another one, a new one that you did not foresee that it would come afterwards. So that is a challenge, and maybe this results in us getting sometimes a pessimistic perspective, but I do think that humanists do quite a lot. I would also like to mention in this context the project of Humanist International, the Humanist at Risk, which is dedicated to help individuals from countries where they are persecuted, basically where they are at risk of being killed for what they believe, or actually usually non-belief. There is assistance provided, so they would leave the country, come to Europe, find asylum or find work and be safe here. And of course, this is a small-scale help because we are speaking about just maybe a few dozens of people that have been saved this way. But, who saves one life saves the whole world, right? So let's remember about that as well. So I think maybe it's time to give a chance to our friends in the audience to ask some questions or have some contributions. Is there anyone who would like to say something?
You just say about Ukraine, and you say that Ukrainian people deferred his own, but in my opinion, it's not only question to defend. This is also a question of war of values, because Ukraine have Zatoński, he is normal elected president democratically. Of course, Ukrainian politics is not ideal because they have a lot of corruption, etc., etc., but he is not authoritarian. He is normal political man, like in Norway, like in Poland, like in Romania. And from other side, we have Putin, who is authoritarian new Tsar of Russia. He is also very danger for Russian people. They now are in some amok, in some narcotic state, in my opinion, because the politics of Putin, in biggest perspective, is very destructive also for Russia, not only for neighbors of Russia, but also for Russia. So it's also fight of values, not only fight for human life. So what do you think about this fight, about values, in this sense, military fight?
With the human rights declaration and the importance of human rights, and we see how the universal struggle for human rights is also a humanist struggle, and to a large extent also for democracy. And in that respect, it is very true what you are saying, that the support to Ukraine is not only a support for Ukraine and the Ukraine's right to defend themselves as if they were sort of any country, but it is definitely also seen as a fight to ensure that to defend these basic values of human rights and democracy. So I agree with that very strongly. And you can always discuss, which we have a discussion, how much do you do in order to go along there? Now, the political debate is, of course, very influenced by the fact that many of us are NATO countries, and we sort of become very, what should I say? I wouldn't say restricted, but that is seen, as a kind of restriction because of the fear in involving the whole of NATO and becoming part of a huge new world war. So the wish to avoid that do put restrictions on the kind of support that is provided to Ukraine. I was going to say, unfortunately, but that's big politics which is there. But you're very right, and as I'm saying, I think it's very true that we feel. I'm going to say yes. We feel the threat. That the fact that Putin's Russia has actually attacked other countries before. It's true. And you can always discuss why we didn't react more strongly when they attacked Georgia, or when he attacked Crimea, or when he provided the support he did to the eastern Ukraine. I think many of us regret it, that we didn't see, but there was something about the fear of being, escalating the war and sort of seeing what can be done in order to limit it. And so there is a fear of war, and that's very real. So there is a moral issue there too. But I think there were many, even the days, you may say that you saw it coming, but I think there were very many observers who never thought he would go to the extent that he did to actually start a major war, a major invasion. So that's but the fact that they did, has created a new fear amongst many of his neighboring countries, and including making our neighbors Sweden and Finland finding the necessity to join NATO, which they never did before. Sweden was very proud to be out of NATO, and neutrality was its credo, and it was part of its sort of national identity almost, and it's changed. Finland didn't have it in the same way, but I mean they've been the neighbors of the Soviet Union in those days, and they had a very troubled relationship, and they were always extremely careful not to provoke anything in that way, and they find it necessary. So what I'm saying with this is that discussion, I'm sure it goes on many other places too, not necessarily that there's even a fear that he may sort of continue if he was successful. So this fight against this support to Ukraine is also stopping Russia from going other places, and a fear that, you know, if he succeeds, what's next? And there is, but that in itself is actually a threat to our freedoms. You know, it limits, you know, I wouldn't say it gives us a direction, but there's a fear that sort of our freedom, yeah, they even say so in Norway. Northern Norway is one of the potential possibilities because it's such an important strategic area. So there is a fear there. And, you know, for having a neighbor, or having a big country like that, threatening not only Ukraine, but also many of his neighbors, etc., and generally the world globally, it's extremely worrying. It's extremely worrying. What we as humanists can do about it, what can we do in order to promote any humanist thinkers and real humanist thinkers, not only those who were atheists because they were communists, but the real humanist thinkers? Because I'm sure there are people in Russia too, some of them running away, but there are others, you know. So the important thing is to sort of to see what can they do and what can we do for them.
I just wanted to add about the fear sentiment that you mentioned, because in the spring, when the refugees were starting to come to Romania, and a lot of our members joined the help of as volunteers that were, or helping the volunteers to find all the information they need to find housing and to make their papers in the embassy and so on. There was all this discussion online on all the groups, who's next, because everybody was afraid, and we kept going back to the fact that we have this song, folk song in Romania from the communist era. It's called something like "In the Shadow of the Big Bear being Russia," and the communism that spread, actually the USSR, not Russia at that point, and the communism that spread and was also in Romania. So we kept looking towards the Republic of Moldova, which many of us consider like brothers because we used to be part of the same country, and the threats that they are facing, and the people that live in Ukraine who are Romanian ethnics, and some of them decided to get back to Romania when the war started. And of course, this feeling of fear, it's sometimes paralyzing, and it keeps you from doing something else. And it's an infringement on freedom of some other kind.
Thank you. Is there any other contribution?
Thank you. I'm not going to say a lot of, but a few points I would like to mention. If someone is going to stop war in the future, then I think it must be humanist people, not church. They have never done that. Religious people are not very concerning about stopping wars. So my hope is on the humanist side. And what I see in the last 10, 15 years of people in many countries, actually, young people, they don't want participate in war. We have seen in United States of America, many young people escape to Canada to avoid to participate war, and the same happened in Russia. There must be very strong humanist movement, which is not visible in Russia, but they don't want Putin's politics. They don't want to participate more war. So it reminds me that we are humanist people. Yes, we are not pacifist in the sense of defending ourselves, but my hope is that it's only us to is able to promote the pacifist ideas in this world. So I'm not expecting any help from any religious authorities.
Well, I think we are very far from expecting help from religious authorities. Right. Would you like to comment on that?
I agree with some parts of what you said. I've seen a lot of Russians people that fled to other countries because they didn't want to fight. So I understand that, and I also saw the people that were protesting. Sadly, they are a minority. I'm not sure if, like you said, they are on this dependency on the politics and the speeches that Putin puts forward. But hopefully, this minority will grow and they will change from within. I'm not sure how.
It doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't seem like this. But in regards to the church, the Russian church is pro-Putin, so I'm not sure if there is any hope there. So
so is the majority of the people, as the poll suggests, actually. So yes, I mean there are some of those that fled, but there are also, of course, some of those who would be against, but they are too afraid to speak up. And as far as I understand, they are even changing the laws now that will make it even more difficult to protest in Russia against the Putin's politics. So. Yes, I mean, it would be ideal to have a strong humanist movement that would be changing the mindset of people there. But I think it's very challenging, especially at these times, because they would be risking their lives, in fact.
Yeah, true, but I must say I do disagree somewhat with which was being said here. It's not true that religious people have not stopped wars. There's been a number of cases, of course, in the world also where very deeply religious people are actually against wars. I mean, even you mentioned the Vietnam War. Many of the churches in the States were strongly against the fighting in the Vietnam War. They were, and you've seen that many other places, including now. I mean, the Russian Orthodox Church officially does support the war, but there are many religious voices from elsewhere that are strongly appealing for a peaceful end to the war, and even in support of Ukraine's right to fight back in order to win it in a way. So. If you look at the history, I mean, there are enough amongst religious people too. We must admit that actually have been.
Definitely Gandhi was one.
Gandhi was definitely one of them, and as still the ideal for the nonviolent movement. Gandhi is there. So it is also in this case. I mean, it goes to show that most religions, I think all of them, can be used and misused, and some will say it is inherent in some religions to be violent. That can be debated because even within those religions, there are people who say that that's not the case. I mean, Christian may say, you're not supposed to kill anybody according to one of the 10 Commandments. and there are people who are using that. There are many Buddhists who have been very violent in their support to the war in Sri Lanka. But there are also extremely many Buddhists who would be strongly against it and doing what they can in order to be extremely peaceful in meeting violence and etc. So I think that there's a big there's a need to differentiate here. That's my point. Thanks.
But from every way you look at it, this is an argument towards the importance of separation of church and state. Even if the representatives are on the one position or the other, the fact that they do not have enough power to be hand in hand with the state powers, it's good.
Maybe I have to differentiate my opinion on this because I didn't mean religious people. I mean religion as an institution. And I have thought about how big power they have, according to us or humanists are not organized in many countries. According to the power they have done so little. I agree that some big leaders we have had, Indira Gandhi, but religion as an institution is not promoting anti-war ideas. And extremism we can find very easily and everywhere in many countries, both Christian, Hindu, Muslim. This extremism is not something we have in humanism, but it's very easy to find in religion.
Would you like to respond to that?
No, but I heard that there is no extremists. There is no humanist extremists. I think that we can subscribe to.
So you do agree with that part? Well, hopefully, maybe we don't know them yet.
Yes.
Or maybe that's the new stage. The new threat to freedom will be a rise of radical humanists. Who knows? Let's hope not.
Forcing the world to do better.
Yeah. There is an issue which you haven't touched on, and that is, of course, the climate change and the threats from elimination of nature. That in itself is a threat, not necessarily to the immediate freedom, but it's definitely a threat towards humanity. And I'm glad to see that it is being taken more and more seriously, but not sufficiently, far from sufficiently in the world. And there are those, as you may know, who feel that threat is so important that you have to, do away with some of the freedoms. You need these enlightened democracies are not good enough. I mean, they may agree, but they will not be strong enough to do something about it. You need an enlightened, strong man and strong woman to lead countries and the world. There are those who argue that you can't wait for democracy to solve these issues because it has to be solved. It has to be solved. That's an argument which is being used. I hope it doesn't come to that. I don't agree with that sort of feeling, but I can see the debate is on even there. So I mean, it's an issue. To what extent do we have to? Is it necessary to sort of turn? Well, you can say that even if you relate it to the pandemic, there were many who argued that if a state can do such things during the pandemics, why can't it do similar things in order to save the globe from destroying itself, or from us from destroying the globe? Actually, the globe will survive, even if mankind doesn't.
Yeah, we now already have the precedent where that if we come together, we can do some good. But we don't usually come together. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for pointing this out, because actually, yes, it is a big threat, and it will definitely threaten also the freedom of many people, as many places in the world will become inhabitable, and that will create a lot of new problems in the early stage. I'm talking before we destroy the whole globe. So yes, it's actually a big question whether we should impose lots of restrictions on the people now in order to save the planet. And it's a very tough one, because there are similar questions related, for example, to vaccinations, whether it should be something mandatory to vaccinate, right? Because of course we know that vaccinations only make sense when certain number of the population does that. If there are not enough people, then it doesn't work. So there are many such issues that are being debated right now. And I'm not sure if the humanists all follow the same in this regard. I mean, ideally, it would be the best if you didn't have to impose this kind of rules, but you could just educate people in a way that they would finally understand on their own that this is good, that they should do it voluntarily.
Probably it should be a mix of imposing something, encouraging something else, and rewarding some good behavior. Because if you just impose restrictions, you will find that the backlash from the people will be big enough to maybe even go against you in the long run. Maybe if you reward some good behavior and you have incentive for people, you achieve more with the carrot than with the stick. So
yes, but there is still this argument that these changes come too slow.
Yes.
Right? But I strongly disagree with the idea that an absolute monarch would save us, or a dictator would save us. That's quite an absurd.
We had enough dictators that wanted to save us before. So yeah,
that's right.
But in regards to what you said about the small changes and that it takes a long time, the scientists have warned the world about the climate change decades ago, and the world just now take notice, and they started to say, oh, by 2030 we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that. But you knew about it long time ago. You just passed the responsibility to the next generation. Now you cannot do that because the new generation are in the street protesting and asking you to act now. So yeah, you do not have the chance to play for so long with their future.
Arve, would you like to add something?
No, I agree.
No. Is there any other contribution? No? Well, then thank you very much. I will encourage whoever watches the video online to leave some comments. We will be glad to respond to those comments later on. Thank you very much.